allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic which stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. See, I thought I went the other way. Amazing. Range on that. So now we're here to talk about on the green and Royal Oak. We're going to start off with the staff report. Retta, turn to views, set the stage, and then I think we'll go to Gary after that. So Retta.
Thank you. I just wanted to know the overview of the complex itself in terms of the number of buildings and number of units. So there are 16 buildings that comprise of 158 actual units within the complex. At this point, based upon an conception,
sorry, I forgot. So at this point, I would just ask our Assistant Chief Gary Alford to give a report in terms of the findings of that report and the actions that we have taken in order to address life safety issues for not only the residents there, but our own staff who do need to respond to calls there.
Assistant Chief, you're on. You figure out the microphone.
I figured it out. It's all good. Thank you, Loretta. You've all received a copy of the XPEX report. That was the report that we received on Thursday, June 24th. Eddie and I have reviewed that report. I found some things that were very concerning that were in the report. This report was an independent report of a building official, basically due to somebody falling through the outside stairs, which are means of egress at building 302. And what concerned me was about the steps, which are means of egress for the upstairs apartments, was that they were considered and deemed unsafe by the inspector. Also in the report, there was some information about building 306 having some foundation and structural issues. So Eddie and I went down and looked at the building. We decided to call Loretta and have an emergency meeting with the prosecutor's office, the building department, to see what was best way to move forward with this information that we had obtained. After we talked to them, we decided to basically look at putting a serious hazard orders on all of the steps and stairs that were means of egress in buildings 300 through 318. I don't know if Eddie's got a map or something so that we can all kind of see what that looks like.
Are you going to the photo, or are we just scared? I'm going. Just thought it would be awkward if we're all just looking at you.
He did put together some very good illustrations so that we can relate to the building numbers and the locations that we have to review. Also to note that there were, I believe, 3 occasions over the last couple years, at least 2 or 3 years there, that there have been problems with the stairs, the means of ingress, egress.
Yeah, this was actually the 3rd time that we're aware of in the last 5 years that somebody has fallen through steps there as a means of egress.
So, since we're buying time and stretching out the discussion, you mentioned that this is the 3rd time on this particular property in the last 5 years. From your recollection, are there any other times in the last 5 years, any other complexes that have had a similar problem?
Not that I'm aware of, no. And I've been in this business for close to 25 years now, and I've never experienced anywhere where there's been any type of stair collapse for a means of egress like this that we have seen.
All right, we're up.
Okay, so.
You guys all see that, or is it really dark? because you might be able to turn around and see it from behind a little bit better.
It depends on, I think perhaps from your direct view, it's better.
So the buildings we're talking about are the ones that are in green, 1 through 5. And in section 2 is building 306 that had the structural issues. So we went down as the fire department, we actually did an inspection on that Thursday night because that's part of the process for a serious hazard order. We knew that the building department was going down the next day at 10 o'clock. So I went back down at 10 o'clock to walk through with the building department. At that time, we determined together with the building department that buildings 308 and 310 had significant life safety hazards to the stairs on the outside. I also made a determination in building 306 that there was structural damage significant enough to place serious hazard orders on that property also. So basically with the serious hazard orders, it relates to the fire code. I have the authority to basically deem that piece of property a hazard and have the tenants evacuate off of that property in a given time. The time I established was 24 hours to have that done. So after I got all the paperwork done and all the orders done, that took place at 4 o'clock on Friday evening, where I gave them 24 hours. So after we did that, we basically went and told Gene, who manages it, what was going on. We notified all of the residents there what was going on about that they needed to evacuate, the reasons why they needed to evacuate. And then Saturday, I went back with the fire department at 4 o'clock, which was 24 hours, and all of the stairs had been repaired and inspected by us at 308 and 310, and they were deemed safe at that time. So no residents had to leave the property at 308 and 310. So after that, the building department came back at 6 o'clock. I went back at 6 o'clock. They basically did their inspection. They also deemed all the repairs were up to their standards. So basically those were cleared. I rescinded those orders on that property. 306 has structural damage still. I required them to have a structural engineer come in and deem that building safe before we allow those residents to go back into that property. So in a nutshell, that's pretty much what happened. So there's still emergency serious orders on building 306 due to the structural damage, especially in lieu of what's going on in Florida right now, that I did not feel comfortable allowing that building to be occupied by any residents at all. So I did go down today at 12:45 with the building department to do a reinspection of all of the stairwells in buildings 300 through 318 that did not have orders on them, but the building department did their inspections on them, and they cleared all of the stairwells and deemed them repaired from 300 to 318, except for 306. Their stairs still needed some work done.
Maybe you're putting these pictures up and all, like Joy Sanders and the like.
From the XPEX report, just the photos.
Yeah, just the photos. Page 4 has some good photos. They're not good, but they're representative. Page 4, 5, and 6 are pretty representative.
I want to ask you, Chief, I'll call you Chief, these repairs that they did, how many days did it take them to actually complete these repairs?
They were working on them already on that Thursday, so it probably took 24 hours.
24 hours.
24 to 48 hours.
Did they ever give you an explanation why they didn't do them weeks ago or months ago?
No explanation.
And then also, I was going to ask you, the report from XPEX, can you summarize for the trustees what the qualifications and experience of Mr. Stoker are?
Mhm. I can speak to that a bit. He's a retired chief building official from other municipalities. and he is the president and owner now of this particular company that specializes in providing chief building official services, basically. They contract with other communities. So he is a qualified building
I
inspector.
remember in my career as a law director, I remember I've heard of him many times, and he does have a good reputation. One other brief question, the report signed by Mr. Stoker indicates that the majority of joist hangers and the majority of stair stringers, and I think when you and I talked on Thursday, you were going to check with him to see what he meant by majority, and if you could summarize what you found out from discussing that with him.
So what he deemed majority was all of the buildings. So I actually had orders written up on all of the buildings. But I did walk around with the chief building inspector for Claremont County along with an inspector. And after we looked at them, we deemed obviously repairs needed to be made, but what we deemed were life safety, the ones we could put serious hazard orders on, were 308 and 310. So basically the Claremont County building inspector is who I based off. That's who's going to support us when we need anything done. So
I would like to add on to Tom's question about, how long it took them to make all those repairs, because in the summer of 2019, I gave a presentation on the complex and the state of the complex at that time. And it was shortly after somebody had fallen through the steps. That was the second time. It's a little bit crazy when you got to number which time it was that somebody fell through the steps. Number two, we went over there, fire and EMS. I believe the guy had to go to the hospital, I think. He was essentially stuck in the stairs, evaluated the condition of the stairs. That was part of my presentation. It was part of what we asked them to do a comprehensive look at and fix what was needed on the stairs. So essentially, it doesn't sound like if all the stairs were named as not being sufficient, that essentially, I don't know if anything was done, but I guess, for all intents and purposes, nothing was done. And now 2 years later, they get it all done in a week. So the motivation was essentially what happened in your action, right?
correct.
I would assume.
Yes, I think he understood he said, your point is clear now that, once the orders got placed on the building, their feet were pretty much put to the fire that needed to be done. So there were multiple crews that were working down there when I was down there. So, and just to be clear on some of the steps, just so everyone's aware, some of it is maintenance issues. So you're not required to get a building permit per se for some of it. It's only when you're dealing with the structural elements of it. So if you're just replacing a landing on the deck, you don't have to necessarily get a building permit for that. You just have to do the repair as was already there.
But generally speaking, the idea that, we're willing to do these repairs and willing to do what's necessary for the folks that live in our complex and make this complex safe for them to go in and out of, would be arguable, because those repairs weren't made until something drastic happened, and drastic action was, you could deem it drastic, was taken. No, I feel we had very little choice in the matter because of the liability end of things. Once we're made aware that those steps aren't safe, that structure isn't safe, like you said, in light of what happened recently in Florida, I feel like we have very few options at that point.
Yeah, and these are the residents' main stairwell for egress. So it's their only stairwell for egress. On top of the residents, our personnel, fire, police, admin people that have to go there and do inspections, we walk up those steps. So if we have a medical emergency there and would have to remove somebody out, you had 2 people plus a stair chair plus equipment on those steps that were possibly hazardous. So it puts our personnel's life or injury in jeopardy.
Right. Was anybody actually hurt as far as we know?
I'm not sure. I was actually out of town when that happened, so I'm not 100% sure. Somebody was hurt bad enough that they called EMS. So I don't know if they were examined and refused. I'm not sure.
Well, just so everybody knows where we came from to get here, Nick pointed out that he did a presentation in 2019 that was very comprehensive, and I thought a very good presentation of all of the cataloging, all the problems on the green, culminated in a 15-point plan that the ownership agreed to follow. Part of that, many of the 15-point plans, of the 15 points of the plan dealt with fixing stairwells, fixing the laundry room, fixing, basically what some would consider blighted conditions. And unfortunately to me, it doesn't seem like they actually did it. Or they ignored major portions of what we were suggesting, culminating in our last meeting in October, where the ownership told us, we don't think we're getting anything out of these meetings, so we think this is the last one we'll be holding. Does anybody remember that? Mm-hmm. So they left us with very little option other than to do what we did. And of course, there's a separate track that the county's taking, which is somewhat different than what we're dealing with here. But it is very disappointing. And I also look at these and I'm wondering, from a county perspective, I'm looking at wooden stairs, wooden supports, decking made of wood. Don't we have any standards beyond this as a county? I mean, it seems kind of ridiculous that we take a building that's in the condition that it's in, and that as a county, we think it's okay to use pressure treated wood as the stair stringers for a major apartment complex. Just a thought, but that's an aside. So I'm really quite disappointed with the ownership, quite disappointed in how they've behaved here. And I think we have no other choice. I mean, at this point, I'm open to any other suggestions that we might have to continue our investigation on that site and to make sure that the 15-point plan is actually being instituted. At this point, I question whether even 1 point of that 15-point plan has been accomplished to our satisfaction.
Well, Alan, we're going on 2 years now, I think. And I mean, that's a lot of time. When you can get that amount of steps fixed in a week.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's amazing.
What could you have gotten done in 2 years?
Yeah, right.
And so, I just feel like that was a great opportunity for them to work collaboratively with us and fix the place up. And, I feel like in a sense, in some way it was kind of squandered. And the police statistics have not, to my knowledge, improved as far as the number of runs and other elements of the general aesthetic and what's going on over there at this point.
Loretta, just to back that up, do we have the police runs?
It had just come to me late. It's not for this presentation, but there's a paper copy that I made. It's the last page in the copies that I made for you. The numbers are not declining. You can look over from 2019 through 2021.
Let's let everybody hear what the numbers are. Let's share.
Well, so we've been looking at several different multifamily complexes. There's 154 units in this one. Compared to the others, it's significantly different. So for instance, Crown Crossing Apartments has 144 units, and they might average a maximum of, I think, 12 or 13. 1 month they had 16 runs in a month. These run up to 57 runs in a month in terms of the number of activity. So they're running basically one a day at least, because they're running from 343 for the year of 2019, 386 for the year of 2020. And they're outpacing those numbers so far in 2021, it appears.
Well, just for fun, let me point out that so let's just play devil's advocate, right? So we've got the Fairway Apartments. Let's pick on them for a second. They managed to have, there's 214 units, so there's more than it on the green. They had 50 runs in a 12-month period in 2019. On the green had 343 runs, the same period of time. Let's jump to 2020. Once again, Fairways Apartment 57. Eastgate Mobile Home Park had the highest if you take out on the green at 85. But on the green has 386. So let's just look at 2021 just for fun, right? And I'm not great at math, so you're gonna have to stick with me on this a little bit. to date, and it's not even to date, we don't even have June numbers in here. We have just May numbers. We have Fairway Apartments, five runs. We've got the White Oak Square Apartments, 1 run. Let's see, so the winner of all of that is really the Crown Crossing Apartments at 9 runs. The way we still have on the green at 41 runs, and that's just till May. So let's just, they're averaging about 41 to 39, 35 is their low per month of runs. They're still outpacing everybody else. But that gives us, 7 more months left in a year? Is that about right? So
Well,
let's
there are
just be-
also higher numbers than in prior years at the same complex.
Well, let's just for fun, let's just give them, we're going to just give them 30 runs a month for the rest of the year. What is 30 times 7? Debbie, you're the finance whiz here. Kind of sounds like 350 runs to me, doesn't it? So they're on pace, because I'm being generous and I'm only giving them 30. They're on pace to 391 runs in the course of a year. They're going to eclipse their best year of 2020. They're on par to beat 2019 even. Their trajectory is this way, not this way.
So to be sure, to kind of back up a little bit, when we did this in 2019, we kind of did our assessment. The first thing we did was pull these reports to ensure we weren't unfairly, kind of singling them out. And so one thing that I did at that time was I came up with a runs per unit. So the number of units, because if it's a bigger complex, you wouldn't want to unfairly attribute more runs and kind of make it look worse than it is. And the runs per unit breakdown that I had for 158 units in the summer of 2019 was 12 runs per unit. The next closest was approximately 3. So I think it was just over 3 times as many. And to be sure, what we're focusing on tonight is more structural.
Right.
But there's a lot of people here that might be interested in where we're at in general with the complex, what else has transpired over the last year or two. So I feel it prudent that we go through a lot of this as well.
So police runs continues to be a concern just in terms of calls for service.
But we were told that they're doing background checks now. Got to throw that out there because they agreed to do background checks on all of their residents.
Is there a way to find out how many of the drugs were due to drugs?
I believe that Chief Bachman can break it down.
I'm sorry.
I believe that Chief Bachman can break it down based on, what kind, but we just don't have it here tonight.
Loretta, there was something that went to, was it October of last, I don't think we have anything current.
Right, there's a 33-page running total. So it was one of the last emails that I'd received today along with this information. But I did not print that because it
I also
was voluminous.
think that if you look up the complaint that the Claremont County prosecutor filed against him to ask for the court to appoint a receiver, I think one of the attachments to that complaint was an affidavit from the police department. And I think it did have somewhat of a breakdown.
So do you think it's very important for us all to know how much drugs is going down in this facility? And how many runs it's costing the taxpayers and yourselves money to run and save these people from their drugs?
Yes.
So I think that's a real first start, you know, get rid of that.
Hey, Loretta, I'm going to ask this of Loretta and of Tom. Can we post that affidavit, or is that, because it's work,
Yes.
the work product on
It
here?
was attached as an exhibit to a complaint, which is public. I mean, anyone can look it up. You can look at the complaint, have a number of attachments, but yes, we can post that.
Like we've done with some other projects in Pierce, can we have a spot on our webpage that focuses on the green?
But we can. I think we did.
We
We may
did,
still.
yeah.
We
I'm
may
not
still
sure.
have a
It might need to
section
be
for that.
updated. It certainly probably needs to be
But I think the
updated.
affidavit needs to be put on there, and the order that was placed by Assistant Chief Offord. I think both of those documents need to be hung up there so that the public can see it.
And the detail of what the nature of the runs was, I looked at it briefly, larceny, drugs, assaults, all the typical things you would
It
expect.
would be sort of interesting to find out what it's all about. I mean,
Sure.
somebody could be heard involved or something through one of those steps.
No, we did
I
break it down.
understand
Yeah.
drugs and the other stuff is a little bit more concerning.
I'd go check that stuff. And tremendous amount of number of them are domestic violence.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, that's probably the biggest one. Yeah,
It
you know
was.
that, I don't know if you're on Facebook, but they put a bi-weekly crime report out there.
Really?
And they show you which buildings it's in, and domestic violence is probably one of the big
You
ones.
guys look at that?
Yeah.
Any chance?
Yeah.
We do, and we're constantly compiling these stats, and that takes time and things. So I think we maybe need to dig a little more and kind of break these down at this point as to maybe violent crime, drug runs, things like that. That might be interesting to
We
see.
don't want any more police to get hurt.
Correct.
Okay.
We've had 4 murders over there, 4 murders in 2 years, a little over 2 years, maybe. How many, you might not know, but Chief Bachman isn't here, but I wonder how many murders we've had in the entire township in the last 30 years. Not much,
Oh, right.
not much.
Well, speaking back of the safety issues, and you may have intended to go over this, Gary, but some of these, in particular, light of the Florida tragedy where, high-rise collapse, some of these structural issues, I'm not a structural engineer, but if you look at some of these on page 3, the foundational issues, those cracks in that block wall, and I'm not sure, I think that's one of those metal temporary posts that you put up to support like a project or something like that. I don't know if that's sitting on treated wood, if it's on a piece of regular wood, which of course, if that, draws moisture into that piece of wood that's supporting that column, will rot, obviously. I guess, what are the thoughts on this part of this structural issue?
So this was building 306, it wasn't back away for a structural issue. So what you can't see from the picture really, unless you're there, is in that same picture where that post is, that wall actually bulging in. It almost looks like it's pushing toward you when you look at it. So it's really hard to see in the picture, but that was one of our biggest concerns was that wall looks like it's really ready to collapse in. So we actually inspected the residence list in on the first and second floor there, and there's cracks in the walls there. The floor was spongy, which was soft. There were doors, closet doors that wouldn't even open all the way because there's been so much settling from either that foundation problem or settling over years. So, but again, like you, I'm not a structural engineer, so all I know is it doesn't look good. So that's why I required them to get a structural engineer to look at it to deem it safe. So just, I'm saying, all those pictures, all those pictures, that the discoloration there, that's where water is actually coming in. So there's water coming in, obviously you can see there's moisture, and it hadn't rained for, a couple of days, and there's still moisture that's in there. So there's obviously mold that's also in that structure too, so.
Tom?
So for building 306 to be reoccupied, if I understand it, the property owner has to provide a report from a structural engineer that is acceptable to you and to the county building inspector. Is that
Only to me. The only one who can repeal or rescind the serious hazard orders are myself or a judge. Those are the only people. So that structural engineer report is based on what I see. Now, the county's going to need one for them to do repairs. They still are going to have to do the repairs. My concern is life safety. Can people be in there while the repairs are being done?
So structural repairs, the structural engineer will have to deal with the county, to get back in,
Yes.
and to deal with you for that.
The county actually put a 30-day adjudication orders on that property too, to have that foundation repaired. However, the structural engineer, because the building inspector is not a structural engineer either, so he's going to rely on whatever that structural engineer says for them to make those proper repairs.
So that's something that I wanted to focus in on just a little bit. You said you're not a structural engineer, is that correct?
That's correct.
You said that the building department inspector is not a structural engineer, is that correct?
That is correct.
We have a structural engineer on call, is that correct, Loretta?
They'll assign one, but yes, Clangers has
Once
structural
that,
engineers.
once that report is presented to you, my recommendation is that we discuss the issue tonight of hiring or at least paying for our structural engineer to come in and review that report and make recommendations back to the owner. And so whatever time it takes to do that review is the time it takes to do that review. I don't know if we need to make that into a motion.
That would be, I think, the best thing, because there's so many legal things floating around. It would be good to focus on a specific motion to do a specific thing. That'd be great.
Why isn't the county building department willing to come over and help us out more with this?
Well, they can, but they're not engineers. So
They don't have engineers in their staff?
I'm sure they do, but I feel more comfortable. They don't have them in their building department. But I don't trust that. I want our review.
So it's not the responsibility of the building department to do that. They basically go out and inspect. And once they see a hazard, it's on the owner of the property or the manager who's ever managed it to take care of hiring a structural engineer, paying that structural engineer, and then making the repairs based off what that structural engineer says. So basically, he has to get a permit. He's got to hire a structural engineer. And then whatever the structural engineer says for the repairs, he's got to get a permit that's approved by the building department. So he has to draw plans based off what the structural engineer says. Then the building department goes back, they have 30-day adjudication orders on that property. So after 30 days, if he doesn't get it, it goes to the prosecutor's office. So if they don't have those repairs done. So then the prosecutor basically forces them to
So we're going to kind of truncate some of that and speed this along.
No,
Yeah.
we're
Well-
going to make an engineer look at it and take.
Well,
his
yeah, but
time.
it would take quite a bit for the county to let them have their own engineer,
But what I'm
essentially
worried about-
self-police.
But what I'm worried about is that there won't be an engineer, that a plan will be presented by the ownership to the county will review it and say, it looks good to me, and they'll go in and they'll start to do the work. I want an engineer to actually look at this and make recommendations that we can then go back to the building.
So I'm meeting tomorrow with the owner and the structural engineer that he's having look at the property. I want to be there to hear what he said. So, the building department, I believe, is going to go, he cannot just do the plan without getting a structural engineer. He's going to have a structural engineer.
Well, I understand that.
To give him a written plan before the building department's going to even approve the plans for him to do the work.
Right. And I understand all that. I understand that there will be a structural engineer that has to come in here. And I trust that the building department, the owners of this complex will get an engineer to say what they need to say to get the project done. I want to have our engineer checking the work of their engineer to make sure it gets done right.
Yeah, I agree with that. Not to say that their engineer is not going to be objective, but they're writing a check for this engineer's fee. So I think having an objective third-party opinion is appropriate, worth the investment. So I'll make a motion to that effect, that we hire a structural engineer to evaluate this situation in question.
To review the report that's provided and if necessary, provide additional inspection.
At the township's expense, yes.
I agree with that, Pete, and I'm more than willing to spend the money. I've gone a long way on this thing over 2 years.
We're done yet.
But my point was, it's a little salt in the wound to have to spend the money that they should be spending, or that perhaps the county could help us with. I understand where you're coming from, but that was my initial question. And so now we spent a lot of police money, a lot of resources, a lot on this complex to get to where we're at, which is nowhere right now. I mean, frankly, it's nowhere.
You know,
The runs and everything else are worse than they have been since we started this process with having these folks come in and meet with us. It's worse. It's not getting better. It's getting worse. I like kind of like where we're heading here, but we've been in these situations before. I just want to make sure we're crossing all our T's, dotting all our I's, and being as thorough as we possibly can to get an effective result out of the back end of this. And that's the only place I'm coming from. Willing to work and spend money on it, but also want to make sure the money is wisely spent and that we're actually getting traction and going somewhere on this. And I know the county has their angle, they're working on it in another direction, and that's great. But to date, we don't really have anything to show for it.
Well, sadly, this so-called ownership apparently doesn't respond to things until they're at the critical point. And so I think armed with this additional piece of information, I think, maybe as long as they know that we're hiring our own staff, maybe that will nudge them forward, so to speak.
I will throw out one thing, and I don't know if Tom might be able to answer this. I don't know if they will allow us to go on the property to.
You have the authority to go on the property.
Okay. That was the issue at one point. Going on the property was fine, but where this is inside a basement, so he's gonna have to allow access to have that inspection.
Then we'll get a court order to get in.
Okay, that's all I was asking you now, but
And you should have no problem with it. The other thing is, let's go back to the other buildings real quick, or did you have some more?
We have a motion on the floor.
Sorry.
We haven't
Sorry, we
finished
forgot
that
that.
motion. And
Sorry.
if Pete could say that motion again,
Sure.
please.
So, and Loretta, you can correct the verbiage if you feel it necessary, but, so I'll make a motion that we hire, Pierce Township hire an independent structural engineer to evaluate the report that would.
Please say
Oh,
that.
I'm sorry, Debbie. Let me
Can
start over.
I make a friendly amendment to that?
Please do.
To direct Kleinger's engineering firm to identify a structural engineer,
To what now?
to identify a structural engineer
To review the findings of the Claremont County Building Department's study and make recommendations.
And pursue an additional inspection, independent inspection if necessary.
I'm gonna make that a separate motion.
Oh, okay.
We'll figure it out.
I'm gonna make that a separate motion. You're good.
Could
Just
you write up your motion and please send it to me, Mr.
Okay,
Campbell?
yes, ma'am.
scratch the last part about the independent.
I haven't even got that part written.
All right, so we have a motion, I think, and we have a second.
I will second.
We have a motion and a second. Do we have any discussion?
I got one thing, to review their engineering plan, not.
On the greens.
On the greens,
On the
they're
greens.
not.
On the-
Correct.
yes.
On the greens, not the Claremont County Building Department. All right, so.
All right. All right, we have a motion, we have a second. We've had discussion. Roll call.
Mr. Campbell.
Yes.
Mr. Kelly.
Yes.
And Mr. Freeman.
Yes. Secondly, so I understand, did we review the other buildings, did you say?
We reviewed building 300 through 318.
Okay, so there are still, what, 2 buildings that have not fully been inspected by Jerry Stoker, correct?
Yes.
Let's get those inspected.
So have them review the ingress egress of the remaining buildings.
Yes. Having said that, I think a separate motion to have the review of the remaining buildings at On the Green by Jerry Stoker, or actually it's expense, and Kleinger's. I don't want to focus on few buildings and miss something in some other buildings. So I want to do a thorough review of the remaining buildings on this site. Do we have a motion?
I will make the motion for X-Specs to do a review, structural review of the remaining buildings that have not yet been reviewed on the green.
You got that one? Okay, I'm working on that. I second the motion.
All right, so we have a motion, we have a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, let's do the roll call, please.
Mr. Kelly.
Yes.
Mr. Campbell.
Yes.
And Mr.
Yes.
Can I have one thing not related, related to that, but not promotion? When I was there discussing that he was moving the start repairing the stair to the other buildings, and the building department representative said they'll probably go back and do inspections of the rest of the building. So I'm not sure if we need a motion or how it works, and maybe get some information on basically asking the building department to do the inspections also. Because that's what I'm gonna base, if something would come up, I'm gonna base that off of what the building department says, so, on top of the independent, so I'm not really sure if any of you know how. We just call the building department, ask them to do an inspection, or?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we can essentially get a complaint filed, and then they're essentially obligated to act on that.
Okay.
So if we've placed a formal.
But let's do it in concurrence, so we've got everybody in the same room. And I also want to make sure that we're not just looking at stairs. We're looking for everything. We're looking at foundations, we're looking at water damage, we're looking at mold. I want to go through these buildings with a fine tooth comb, okay? Because I'm sick of this. Anything else? All right, so I guess we're done with that part. So.
Can I add one more thing?
Yep.
Page 3 or page 4, I guess. When Gary told them that he was going to do this on Thursday, they ran out and filed a motion in court asking for an injunction for the court to stop this. The problem is they filed it in the Claremont County prosecutor lawsuit. So they filed a motion in the case where the county prosecutor is asking the court to appoint a receiver, ask the court to stop the Claremont County prosecutor from inspecting the building and closing the building. And as we all know, it's not the Claremont County prosecutor who's doing this, the Pierce Township Fire Department. So that motion got filed, and instead of an immediate hearing, which was my concern, is that we'd be all running down the court on Friday morning, last Friday, they set it for a hearing on July the 8th. So number one, I don't think that hearing will go because there's no reason for it. There's no proper party, and we haven't been served with a complaint, and we're not party to that case. So I just want you to know that as of now, there's a hearing, and what the status of that hearing is and what the nature of that hearing is very, very unclear now, but I'll certainly let you know.
Okay, great.
Thanks,
Thank
Tom.
you. Okay, anything else? All right, we're up to the public comment, open floor discussion.
So when you closed the building down for the stairs and then displaced how many people in a 24-hour period?
Well, it's more than a 24-hour period on building 3 to 6 because they have done the repairs or had a structural engineer come in. So there's 4 units that were affected by that closure of that building. I do not know how many families exactly that entails or how many people are living in those actual units. But I do know that one of the units was put up in a hotel and the other 3 are staying in other places on the property.
And that is at the expense of the property manager
Yes.
or the owner.
Correct.
So my question then too also would be the same question. And not sticking up, I understand the bigger picture here, but how many of those families are law abiding and are going to be displaced, and at what cost to whom is that going to apply to? Because let's say if this does get shut down, I know it's a process, but those people that have paid their rent on time and stuff like that, what is their recourse going to be? Because if these owners sell or, God forbid, skip town, where are the good people that live there? Where is their recourse going to be?
I think that's a great question, Renee. And I think there probably are a lot of good folks that live there, essentially. And when it comes down to it, once we inspect these buildings, I feel like we can't afford not to. We can't afford to have structural issues with a foundation and have, God forbid, a building collapse. Or that's kind of the role of a government in that sense, is to step in when the private sector doesn't fill the role properly. And the private sector at this point, because motivation is keep rent coming in and keep costs low, is not filling that role. And they're not doing it in a safe way for the people that live there. So I think on the contrary, we're really looking out for the folks that live there. I think we need to continue to inspect and ensure those buildings are safe. And if they're not, we don't have much of a choice other than to act on it. Otherwise, people are left unsafe. Our fire and EMS, if they have to go in there, and are left unsafe. That's not on us. That's on the people that have owned this building for years now and have plenty of opportunity to fix some of this stuff up and have chosen not to take it. And we've done our diligence. We've come in here how many evenings for meetings with these folks, and spent hours going over their plans. Our staff, Eddie, Loretta, Gary, and Chief Wright, who's not here tonight, Chief Bachman, countless hours.
And I wonder too, on that same note, do you guys get complaints from the good people that live there? And do do they have records? Because if I live there and that's all I can afford to live there, which probably a lot of people do they complain to the management company about the living conditions? And do you guys, does that come to you as well? Because I think that only helps in your.
I think that's filtered if it comes to the management. We're not going to probably hear about a lot of that, but Google On the Green and look up the reviews. They'll speak for themselves. Or the people that live there.
There are a few people that have said some nice things to say, not many about that. But, Gary and I had this conversation to your point, Renee, about these kids, for instance. There are kids that live there, I'm sure, that have no dog in the fight. They're helpless, and our responsibility is in part to those children who can't speak for themselves and act for themselves to, in fact, shut these places down. But ultimately, the responsibility for housing and so forth, covering expenses, will lie with the landowner, the property owner. And these folks should very well take action on their own. I would hope that, they could be, they would be educated to the point where they know that they could perhaps take action and sue if necessary for recourse. But it falls to the landowner, the property owner, to be responsible in that regard.
So I can answer your question a little bit. So I just want, so everyone's clear, those buildings were shut down due to life safety hazards for no other reason except for life safety. I met with all of the residents that were in the building that we shut down. To let them know that I was personally the one who basically shut that building down for safety reasons, life safety reasons. They were all very understanding. They were all very thankful that we went in and did that, because they're living in conditions that they've complained about, that they don't want to live in, and nobody's done anything. I think actually one was even on news. I think he said for 2 years they've been, making complaints and nothing got done. So not one resident that I talked to was unhappy. Some of them have already moved most of their stuff out of that building and have moved into another apartment there. But before we even did this, I had phone calls into numerous resources that if anything happened to those residents, that they were going to be taken care of somehow by this township, because we weren't going to allow our residents to go out on the streets anywhere. So that was all in place prior to all this. That's why this didn't happen like immediately. There were tons of meetings before we made this decision to shut this property down, to allow those residents to even get some of their belongings out. But when we were doing the inspections, there were cracks, there's water coming in their residence, and they've all complained. Every single resident that we talked to complained. So they were all very happy and thankful.
So one time I did a project, and this is a long way to get to your answer. I did a project for Hamilton County, and we were trying to buy some property. And so we were putting in the record how much we were willing to pay for the piece of property. And one of the elected officials said, "So how much do you think that the owners are going to ask for this property?" And they were like, "Well, we don't know. Wait until we negotiate." And I said, "Smart lawyer is going to open up the files, and they're going to see that we just allocated $800,000 to purchase this property. You think it'll be close to $800,000 that they're going to ask for?" And the answer is, "Yep, sure is." So I don't really want to give away a whole lot of what we want to do or what we can do, because I do think the responsibility lies on the landowner first. So as Gary said, we don't want to put good people out on the street with no support. So there are some things we can do. I don't really want to get into a whole lot of them. Gary actually did a great deal of research on some agencies that could help folks, to help them relocate if they need to, or relocate permanently. And then there were some other pieces that I've been starting to do some research on as well. But first and foremost, that landowner, that property owner has to step up. They're actually paying a fairly sizable rent for the property that they're offering for these folks. I mean, what is it, about $800 a month in rent for this particular location? Would you pay $800 in rent for that? So I feel bad for these folks. They're good folks that are there, and we're going to try to find a solution that works for them. But we can't let them be unsafe at the same time. And we certainly are not willing to sacrifice another one of our first responders to this particular property. We're done with that.
Since we've got some folks here, perhaps from the media, I guess maybe important to note that folks that own this property or have no connection to the area. They're out of county or absentee landowners.
Utah.
Right. So no connection to Greater Cincinnati. For what it's worth.
Did you know? I was pointing to Renee.
Oh, what? I'm sorry. I fell asleep.
Usually you do that when I
You go into story time, Alan.
I wish that worked on my kids. Jeez.
No, that answered, I think, too, with the acquisition of Amelia, that a precedent has to be set, because I think there's gonna be another problem arising.
We're already on that.
Okay, so,
Somebody went on a field trip just the other day.
okay. But I've heard whisperings of the same thing is happening, and I think that, you know, Nick, I know you've done work, and 2 years is, like you said, it's too long. And if the precedent is set that this is not the place for those kind of management companies to come into our neighborhoods and turn them into something like this, then that's going to, I hope, deter those kind of people from owning property. You know, and your residents are only going to get away with as much as the management company allows them to. And it's just a shame that it's gotten this far, and I don't want to see the same thing go on. So, I mean, I think what you're doing and what Claremont County, and I appreciate everything, you know, and getting it out in the news so that people do know and understand that this is something y'all have not forgotten about.
Right. And I think, I gotta say, Nick has done a fantastic job of really keeping this front and center throughout this whole process. So, I think so. Anything else?
What about discussing these drugs that are going through this place?
I think we got to compile some stats. We're going to work on that.
Yeah, we got.
I mean, we got them, but I don't think they're updated in that, with that filter, or maybe they are. we don't have them in front of us.
There are all these people getting taken to the hospital every month. I'm assuming a lot of that's due to drugs.
Well, what was it?
So how will we get rid of the drugs? Good question, huh?
Yes. The $1 million question right there. Well, I mean, what was it, 6 months ago? 6 months ago or so, a major drug dealer was was arrested in the parking lot of that particular location. So, you know, our police officers are there quite frequently, even when they're not on a run. So they spend a lot of time cruising through the parking lot and spending time, you know, trying to work issues. But it's, again, it's at the expense of other things.
And it's not a coincidence that you have potential drug issues, you have maybe potential domestic violence, you definitely have a lot of police runs. You have a place that's not in good shape, you have structural issues, you have people falling through the steps. All these things don't just happen on their own sporadically. These are all functions of something deeper, of a management that is probably not good. If you solve a couple of these problems, a lot of them will probably fall into place. And I think that's what we're kind of trying to work toward, is more of a comprehensive approach that will force management, or hopefully compel them at the very least, to start taking steps with background checks and fixing the place up and taking care of some of this stuff. That's going to be a long-term fix and not just a short-term Band-Aid.
And I will say another thing that has been a positive is that we're now working. I think Claremont County has been doing more with us now than in the past. And so that teamwork has improved dramatically.
Absolutely.
With the new prosecutor that's in that seat. So quite frankly, we're getting more of a response, a team response than we did in the past. So I think we're kind of moving in that right direction, but we just have to, there's some things we need to continue to push and push and push. And sadly, it just takes so darn long to get it done.
I would have loved to have moved on this a lot quicker a long time ago. I would have loved to move on this a lot quicker a long time ago.
And I would argue that if we had a responsible owner,
yes,
it would have been fine.
But when you were out there, did you notice the pool's open?
Oh, it's not.
Yeah, interesting. They promised us that the pool would be open in May. And it's still not open. Golly. Guess that's number 14 on the list. They didn't get that done either.
Well, we're not giving up on it. We'll keep plugging away. And I feel like we are pursuing a kind of a unique and uncharted path at this point that will hopefully be fruitful. We tried the collaborative approach prior to now.
We try to be nice guys. And
That didn't work very well.
that's not good.
Just for the folks that may not have heard this, I see Gene a lot, I've got some dear friends that live over there, and I went to the hearing back a few weeks ago, and he was talking to me about how they had spent $1.8 million on the apartments, and I go, good start. They need to spend 3 times that, because you can't really see it, and he did show me his Excel spreadsheet where he does do background checks and all the results and all that stuff. So he's doing them, but he didn't seem to have enough to cover, because I thought they were going to do background checks when somebody did their lease.
Mhm.
And it was not a huge list, it was, if you got 158 apartments there.
Well,
They think they're making progress, but I'm not seeing it.
I think there's a PR line that is taken on a regular basis, and that's one of them. We're doing background checks, I swear. I don't know how efficient or effective those are, because clearly the numbers aren't adding up. But having said that, that's actually the bailiwick of the prosecutor's office and their main portion of their case. So it would be wise for me to shut up. You may.
Legal issue is that we were sued last week by Omni Green. No, I'm sorry, not Omni Green, by the owner of the truck that was used in the last homicide. The owner is a company, and I guess it was their employee who was driving it, who I think is the accused murderer. And the company asked the court to order that our police department return the truck to them. And our police department's response is, no, we need that truck to prosecute this person. So that's being worked out. And we think that perhaps the company really just wants something that's inside the truck. And that might be able to be worked out. But the owner actually sued the Pierce Township Police Department. And the statute is very clear that if you have a search warrant, you search for something and you see something in there that you need, you confiscate it and you keep it until the case is over. So it's let's just say it's not a real strong case that they have against the Pierce Township Police Department. Plus they sued the police department, which is not an entity that you can sue anyway.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'll fill you in on that as it evolves.
But I just like what you were going to say.
I was just saying, thanks, Tom.
It does occur to me that there was one other thing I wanted to discuss, so under other business, I'll bring it up later. Anything else? Okay. Other business? You reminded me. I would like to spread the love a little bit around some of the other complexes that we have. And I'm curious about the discussion. What would be the process to allow Gary's troops, and I know you've got other things to do, but to look at some of these other complexes, to review them for safety issues as well. While we're at it, we might as well go ahead and spread the love around.
So actually, we just, because of COVID, we just started doing our inspections again, starting earlier this month. So all the buildings will be on a regular annual inspection. So there's nothing specific. It's just a random, whenever they come through our inspection hall. So they will all be inspected once a year. If there's any complaints or anything like that, then that obviously generates another inspection.
Okay.
Because there are a couple of apartment complexes that I think we should certainly take a look at sooner rather than later and get them on our radar screen. Perhaps that's a discussion we can have offline. Anything else? If there's nothing else, then we are up to the lovely moment of our meeting when we adjourn. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
I will second.
We have a motion and a second, Debbie.
Mr. Campbell.
Yes.
Mr. Kelly.
Yes.
And Mr. Freeman.
Yes. Thank you all for being here tonight.